Jean-Paul Sartre famously said that the Marxist vision of a utopia was only realized once, and that is in Israel, on collective farms in Israel, on the kibbutz. Why is that the case? So let us first say something about why and when the first collective farms in Israel are established. Between 1881 and the First World War, Jews are persecuted all across Europe, especially in the Russian Empire. There, they are killed at a very high rate. And as a consequence of that, most of them sympathize with left-wing ideas, such as Marxism and Kropotkin's collectivistic anarchism. And those ideas can be found at the heart of the kibbutz movement. Not to mention that the failure of the revolution in the 1905 also encouraged many young Jews to try out those ideas in a new environment, uh, in Israel, to be more precise. The first kibbutz is established in 1910, or in 1910, but many argue that in a true sense of the word, the first kibbutz was established in 1921. That is the year in which the collective farms become open for all those that want to join them, and that is one of the essential principles present on the kibbutz. So let me first describe the kibbutz in a few words. So they are collective farms, and uh, all the people on them have a right to vote. They can vote new members in, and those new members can be brought into the farm voluntarily. So everything is voluntary, not like in the Soviet Union. And the main goal of the kibbutz is also not necessarily to maximize the profit. The workers and the peasants can vote on what they want to do with the profit. They can take more vacation, which is what they often do, or they can choose to maximize the profit. It is all on them. They choose their leaders. All important positions are elected for 1 year. The managers are elected for 1 year. The people in charge of certain committees like education, entertainment, um, cattle growing, all of those committees exist, and they are their their leaders are in power only for 1 year, which is actually, that principle is what prevents the formation of classes on the kibbutz. That's how they achieved a classless society. And other than that, well, up until the 1950s, so between 1920s and 1950s, all the property was collective. They didn't even have money. The only thing preventing an individual from, let's say, taking all the soap and food and cigarettes for himself were social norms. And in the 1950s, they began using money. Uh, every family was given a certain amount of money. They were allowed to exchange for goods on collective farms, but still, even then, they held to this foundational principle that can be found in Marxism, and that is to each according to his need. So people weren't paid the market value of their job. They were paid how much the community believed they need, which is why I actually happen to agree with Jean-Paul Sartre in his assessment. I do think that classless society was achieved, but that doesn't mean that a perfectly just or a perfectly peaceful society was achieved. As we can see, the collective farms, the kibbutz, were often formed on land that was taken away from the Palestinians, which is why, ironically, they're at the same time a symbol of leftist policy and leftist utopia, and of Jewish nationalism and colonization. So yeah, after the war of the 1948, as we can see here, the territorial changes in that war, the kibbutz, yeah, this is how the first kibbutz actually looks today. The kibbutz are at the height of their popularity. 7.6% of the population in 1948 lived on collective farms. Here we can see the Palestinians being ethnically cleansed during the war. Arab propaganda poster. Yeah, Jewish snipers. And yeah, here is the tank at the entrance of the first kibbutz, the Gania. A Syrian tank was destroyed in the War of Independence, and it is still there today as a symbol of that battle that took place, as a reminder of what happened. And what's interesting, in 1950s, as the Jews were as well ethnically cleansed in surrounding Arab countries as revenge for what happened to the Palestinians, many Jews flee to Israel, and there is a abundance of population, and because of it, their prime minister Ben Gurion asks the collective farms to take new people in, and that's where one might say we have a problem. The first way in which the kibbutz or the collective farms began to astray from their original Marxist ideals is actually when they started to let foreign workers or Jewish immigrants on their farms. The thing is, the old settlers, they just used new settlers as hired labor, which meant that now not everybody was equal. Those that worked as hired labor, they didn't have access to, for example, healthcare, pools, schools, the collective goods on the kibbutz. And also the kibbutz were no longer self-sufficient. So self-sufficiency was also one of the crucial ideals behind the kibbutz movement, and now both ideals were kind of shattered, but still they paid people according to their needs. Here we can see an Israeli woman in the 1950s. But what happened after the Six-Day War is beginning of an end, in a sense, for the kibbutz movement. So after the war, the main ideal for young people became the military, because of that very quick and well planned operation in the Six-Day War, and the kibbutz began losing in popularity, and they began to suffer from demographic decline. But still, they had enough people to work properly. And what also needs to be said after the war, yeah, here we can see the how the territories changed. After the war, a new generation of young Jewish people was born, and many of them simply didn't agree with the leftist ideals of their parents. They never chose to live in such a society. They didn't experience the same life as their parents. They weren't born in Russia. They weren't that interested in anarchism or collectivism. They just wanted to go to the cities or serve in the military and do other things, which is also one of the crucial reasons for the transformation of the kibbutz into something that's no longer a Marxist utopia. And that transformation happens after the year 1985. So we can see that the Israeli economy in that year experienced a huge deflation. And because of it, the kibbutz were no longer able to return their loans to the state, because their loans weren't adjusted for deflation, and suddenly they found themselves in a situation where they owed a lot of money, which they didn't have. And just before that event, the right wingers actually won the parliament in Israel. The Likud government came to power, and they insisted that they will only give money or state subsidies to those collective farms that become more individualistic, more pro-free market, and less Marxist or less collectivistic. And here I agree with Dr. Ravid, that that's like a Jewish intellectual that studied the kibbutz movement. Here I agree with Dr. Ravid that actually what happened was in a way a self-fulfilling prophecy, which is when the government began to subsidize only those kibbutz that listened to their advice. It became more profitable for the kibbutz to listen to their advice. And yeah, but so let me first explain in what crucial ways the kibbutz actually changed, not immediately, but definitely in the late 1990s. They began to change in a way that they became something different. So first of all, this principle of rotation and of democratically electing their leaders was abandoned, and most managers in charge of the collective farms in Israel in the early 2000s were no longer even members of the kibbutz. They were just independent professionals. Also, the collective farms began to pay people accordingly to their market value, which was essentially, in my opinion, the end of Marxism on the kibbutz. And also people began to privately own many things they used in their lives, such as their cars. They began to pay for electricity separately. And what also needs to be said is that with the fall of communism, many just lost the belief in Marxist ideals, and simply no longer even wanted to live in a society that was as collectivist and as utopian as the kibbutz originally were. But what needs to be said is that still the old kibbutz, they still remain in existence. They exist right next to the new, more free market, more pro free market individualistic collective farms that also exist in Israel. And what's interesting is that those that remained on the old, more communal kibbutz actually report higher happiness. And also those that live on religious kibbutzim also report a higher dose of happiness, just generally in their lives. And what's also, to me, very interesting is that the more collectivist kibbutz, if we are talking about today, actually perform better, both economically and when it comes to their demography. But yeah, what needs to be said is that the majority of collective farms are no longer what they were back in the 1920s, or not even in the 1920s, in the in the period before the Likud government took power in 1977. And what's to me interesting about this entire saga is that it still remains a debatable question whether or not the kibbutz, the collective farms in Israel, were in a way doomed from the start, because that utopian idea simply has to fail at one point in time, or whether they were just victims of right-wingers winning the elections, and generally of the political climate changing with the spike in nationalism after the Six-Day War, and generally after the fall of communism, and after the uh, people in urban areas uh, started to outgrow those in rural areas and outvote them. But yeah, that's an issue. I think we won't find a clear answer. But I might do a separate video about it one day. And here we can see the kibbutz that still exists today.